All right. Welcome back to another episode of Cobbled Together. Hoping my microphone is sounding better now. I am your host, Jonathan Reutenberg. Joining me is my co-host, Kristy Pirano, and our guests this week, Eric Cunningham and CA Conservative, to talk about the political fallout of this whole mess. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Yeah, Kristy.
Good to be with you.
Kristy, why don't we start off by talking about the news of this week? I've just seen several notifications over the course of this week. Taliban apparently letting Americans come home, and apparently women are being forced to dress full from head to toe, despite the initial assurances of the Taliban for whatever those assurances were ever worth. Can you help us make sense of the events of this week?
Yeah, so it remains difficult with conflicting reports, some of them deliberate misinformation, to know exactly what's going on. And even between the US government and the Taliban, they play these blame games, and sometimes it's hard to know whose fault it really is. The Taliban claims that they are forgiving people for having worked for the previous government or for the US military. They're definitely committing atrocities in this holdout province of Panjshir, and they're definitely violating pretty much everything in their peace agreement, except for the one that they don't yet have the resources to violate, and that is attacking Western countries. I have no confidence that that's not coming in the future. It seems like in Kabul and in some of the cities where they're being watched, they are trying to moderate. The leaders are claiming, they're trying to moderate their image. I don't have any confidence that the leadership has moderated their ideology, and some of are pretty hardliners that Pakistan has helped get installed there. There have been protests, and I think there have been some people killed. They haven't started just executing tens of thousands of people en masse. I believe they are searching for and killing people, but trying to kind of keep it on the down low. But it's not really clear how long that they're going to be pretending to not be what they always have been. And it is true that I think there have been a few flights out of the Kabul airport to Qatar. At least one of them was primarily an evacuation flight. I believe it was mostly US citizens, potentially dual nationals, but at least US citizens, or citizens or dual citizens of other NATO countries. There are some claims that there were also Afghan SIVs. I haven't really been able to validate that either way. There's also these flights in Mazar-e-Sharif, like these 6 charter flights, and that's been on the news. They've been stalled for a week and a half. The State Department blames the Taliban, but some of the aid groups trying to organize these flights are blaming the State Department. So it could be a combination. We are starting to see some movement again. It seems like there are an increasing number of flights going to be going out of Kabul, at least to Qatar or to Turkey or Pakistan or countries like that. So that's definitely a positive development. There's some talk about some behind the scenes. State Department, there are things they could be doing behind the scenes. It's not really clear how hard they are trying, but there's been talk of maybe overland evacuations where the State Department cuts a deal with a neighboring country to say, okay, let these people cross through your country and then get on a flight. But right now, all the neighboring countries are, there are ways to bribe Pakistan to let you in, but the other countries are pretty much strictly enforcing that you have to have a visa to get there. So if an SIV wants to go to Uzbekistan, they can't just go through Uzbekistan and get on a flight from the capital of Uzbekistan. They have to actually have an Uzbek visa, and the embassy's closed. So it's it's dangerous to even get to any of the borders. And then once you do, if you didn't already have a visa before a month ago, then it's difficult to even get visas now. So it's an extremely discouraging situation because there's tens of thousands of people that are in so much danger and not a whole lot that's happening. We are kind of cautiously optimistic that evacuations will pick up. And the Taliban is claiming they will let people leave if they have a passport and if they have a visa to another country. So there are countries that are working to issue temporary visas en masse to Afghans. I think it sort of remains to be seen how well the Taliban will honor that. And we're also kind of waiting to see what happens for at least half of Afghans or more that don't have passports. That's another huge issue that's kind of unaddressed right now. Besides this, starting to see movement on international flights, another positive development is the White House's announcement a couple of days ago that they are actively partnering with veterans groups. I don't know exactly how much is behind that, if it's just empty talk or if they're going to get serious about it, but I would definitely welcome any development of the White House being more supportive of the private evacuation efforts, which have gotten a handful of people out, but it's been so difficult for the last couple of weeks too, with like no flights going anywhere and no embassies open. So about the only people getting out of the country are those that are like bribing their way into Pakistan, which is also extremely dangerous for Afghans there as well. So yeah, it's not a good situation, but we're kind of cautiously optimistic about more options and more movement on this soon.
Right. So that's just basically a summary of the events of this week. And it sounds bad on the whole. And Biden's approval rating has taken a hit. Eric, you tweeted today that it's plus 0.3 right now, right? Is the net approval?
No. What I tweeted was in the Real Clear Politics average, he is 0.3% from being at 50% disapproval. His approval's underwater. It's about 5 points. But he hasn't hit 50% disapproval for his presidency so far. I don't think this can all be attributed to the Afghanistan stuff. He has had a horrible month.
Just one more thing to point out, which is that I just saw a poll right now. House Dems are up 1 point.
That's the CNN poll, which is garbage. It was polled over a month.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's
poll. That's CNN's new strategy of polling, is to poll for a month, for which is no, that's not how you do it.
Okay. Polling information aside, what are the political? Kristy and I guess we'll ask the two of you questions, or I guess I'll ask all three of you, depending on which works better for you guys. But what are the political implications of this? Because there's quite a bit of fallout, because Democrats are not having a good month.
No. I mean, they're having an objectively pretty bad month. It's not just Afghanistan. It's also inflation being a major concern for people. It's the economy being not great. COVID it's not working out very well, to say the least. Pretty much everything Biden has done in the last month has not been beneficial, or at least has not reassured people. And it's this confluence of factors, in my opinion, that has led to it. If you look at actual polling, Afghanistan's a low priority issue for a lot of people. But what it has done is it's created an environment where people on foreign policy that care about that are very much not happy. Like if you look at polling, I think there was a poll from, I believe it was YouGov, which was just disastrous numbers. Like the vast majority of Americans expecting a terror attack in the next year. The vast majority opposing the decision to the way we withdrew, even if they supported the decision to do it. Biden was hoping for a political win here, getting everyone out before September 11th. He didn't get everyone out before September 11th, and it wasn't a political win. So it's safe to say the objective was not really achieved.
Right. Cameron, what say you?
Well, I think just to preface this with that, the fallout of our decision to withdraw is not simply political, but human as well. I mean, thousands of lives have already been lost. Tens of thousands will likely be lost. Hundreds of thousands to millions will be left in servitude. And so to speak of the political implications is mildly grotesque, even for myself, who's rather infamous for that. But I think it's not, the fallout from it is not so much hyping up, whatever hawks exist in this country, but it's piercing the idea that this administration and Biden are competent, that they are better than the last, that they know what they're doing, that, they're a firm hand to guide America into the future. And that's gone, given their flailing around Afghanistan with their violent murder of 10 people in a drone attack that was obviously not justified, and that they've been lying about ever since in Kabul during the airport shit show. All of this vaccine stuff with them simultaneously arguing that masks are better than vaccines and that you need to get vaccinated, with this sort of, we don't care about the Constitution, just kind of scattershotting all these mandates all around, and moratoriums, which the court will instantly knock down as soon as they see it. with this sort of obvious failure of the president's team to get him in a semi-coherent state for everything he says or does. I mean, you saw that whole thing at the memorial yesterday in which he was ranting about some "do we need to go where they all are" thing or something like, even more reasonable people are watching all of this and saying, is he really good? Does he really does people really know what they're doing? And the answer is obviously no. Even for no, go ahead.
The American people were sold a return to normalcy, and they've not gotten it. That's a substantial problem for this president. When you make a big part of your campaign that the adults are back in charge, things are back to normal, we're not going to be having the Trumpian incidents, we're not going to be having the lying or the failing policies, we're not going to have the anger towards the other side, and then you immediately do that in everything, and on top of that, you're not pursuing competent policies, and the things you are doing in Afghanistan and in other things aren't working. That's not ideal. That's the best way to put it. It is talking about the implications here really doesn't matter from a human perspective. It matters from a perspective of what people see from this president and what they see him as. And polling has shown from that YouGov poll that Americans see Biden as weaker than before. If not a majority, I believe in that poll saw him as a weak president rather than a strong one. Certainly a larger number beforehand than after. The actual salience of the issue of Afghanistan isn't huge, but these are the sorts of things. If you look back in 2014, right? Remember, we had the Ebola crisis. That resulted in the Obama administration facing a lot of criticism over how they were reacting to it, how they were reacting internally. You also saw ISIS calling it a JV team and then it exploding into what it was. That didn't do much to hurt Obama in terms of numbers, but it did present an image of him that was contrary to the one he was presenting and the one that his advisors were presenting. We're talking about image here, not people, but that sort of stuff does matter when you're considering a midterm, which are historically very unfavorable for the party in power in the United States.
Yeah, and especially given the Obama administration had quite a wide delay between them saying something that was going to be wrong and it actually going wrong. Whereas with this administration, that's measured in weeks these days. With them, I mean, the statements they were making in June and July about Afghanistan were called delusional at the time. And we all said that about everything, about the state of the withdrawal, about all the SIV people, about the number of Americans to be left behind.
Leaving Bagram early.
And then it collapsed in the most spectacular fashion, defying even the most pessimistic estimates of those of us in those foreign policy, dark corner of Twitter circles. With the administration still, I mean, it's Baghdad Bob stuff, quite honestly. And I think a lot of people see that. And that's why when you hear, all the usual suspects being mad at the other usual suspects in the media for being mad at the administration, it's because they've lied for so long about this that there's nothing that they can't lie enough to get away from it. Even we all like Jake Tapper, but his kind in the press cannot avoid what has happened, given how clearly.
But hasn't the press actually been doing a good job covering what's been going on in Afghanistan?
Yeah, as a journalist, I actually want to add something in here because my degree is in journalism and I am a journalist in my role in Elections Daily. This betrays what the Biden administration is dealing with right now, betrays a similar pattern the Obama administration had towards journalists and towards on another factor I'll mention, which is that they assumed that by being friendly with journalists, you could get journalists to not do their jobs. Sometimes that works for a smaller scandal, but when it's a big thing that actually matters, journalists are generally going to do their jobs.
Well, I think the difference is that the very political heavy, the congressional correspondents, they haven't been too critical of the administration, but the networks can't have, I forget her name, but she was on the ground in Kabul'd during all of this. They can't have that person on saying how terrible everything is and then have their usual person on trumpeting the latest talking point from Blinken or whatever.
Yeah,
And so I think that's helped ground them.
It's incoherent. And one other thing I'd mention in regards to that is a denial of reality, which is something that was characteristic of the previous administration, except in the last administration. Think about the reaction that was given to the inauguration lie, the claims that he had the biggest inauguration ever. I think the Biden administration expected nothing they would do would elicit that reaction, and it ultimately has with this Afghanistan stuff. Keep in mind, these foreign policy journalists know their stuff. They have relations with people. They know what's going on the ground. For the most part, by and large, journalists are not hacks.
Real journalists are not hacks.
Yeah. And the other thing I would mention, which I think is, again, something the administration's policy focus, which is this idea, going back to the Obama administration, you're kind of repeating the failures of the Obama administration without having Obama in there, who was generally someone who could at least seem competent, who could answer questions, who could be responsive. When Biden is answering these questions, he seems flighty. He seems a bit divorced from the facts in a lot of cases, if not intentionally. His comments don't make a lot of sense. And I think this comes from, again, this idea of the Obama administration. The one thing I'll put, so for the Afghan refugees, few things in polling have been this consistent as people want the Afghan refugees, who are not really refugees, they're people we promised could come here. People want them to be able to come over, even conservatives, even Republicans, because we made a promise to these people. And that matters. The Biden administration seems to have thought Republicans would not be willing to let them in. And rather than discussing with Republicans, they seem to have just decided outright this is going to be the concession to Republicans, that we would leave Afghanistan, but nobody could come here. In reality, that's not what anyone wanted. And they could have just talked to Republicans and figured out that we would be generally okay with this thing going on, especially congressional Republicans.
Few people outside of Tucker Carlson's office don't want refugees to come here.
No, I agree with that. I don't buy that story that they were afraid of our reaction. Joe Biden has been consistently opposed to us bringing our allies here for the past 50 years. There are a few stances that he has repeated over and over again than hating our allies and the people that we've worked with. He did this with South Vietnam, he did this with Iraq, and he's doing it here. All of this, he's afraid of Fox News on this, but not on anything else. Like, what is that?
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And from a political perspective, again, we're talking about a human rights crisis from a political perspective here. So keep that in mind. This is a decision that fundamentally and coherently made no sense on any level at all. The political motivation is not there. The human rights.
Okay, I'm going to let Kristy jump in here.
Do you think there's like a real risk to Biden because he ran on this, like, Trump was un-American for not helping more refugees, and then his administration actually accepted half as many refugees as the worst that Trump ever did, and now we have this, like, dragging their feet on evacuations and not getting special immigrant visa holders out? Like, do you think there's a real political risk that they're underestimating, like, kind of from their left flank, that you're trying to not give Fox News talking points, but now you're really betraying a core group of their base, which is like immigration advocates?
Well, I think
sorry.
Well, I was going to say that it's not the left flank that they should be scared of. It's those centralist Dems that, well, what counts as centralists these days among them, that issued statements against the administration at the time. I mean, you remember it from Molson, from a couple others, that were actively doing their best to get people they personally knew out, and the administration wasn't listening. That random congressmen were doing more work than the whole State Department, and that, I think, is the more surprising thing. The media has always been more hawkish than the Biden faction of the party, but that actual Democrats, especially in the House, would criticize the administration for this, that genuinely surprised me. And I think it goes to show how badly they've messed this up.
And what I would point to again is a lack of coherence in their own messaging. From their own messaging and from their own stances, this doesn't make sense. Nothing about the decision to not bring in refugees at first makes sense on any level at all, other than a personal dislike of Joe Biden for the concept of bringing in refugees. In that sense, it's a very Trumpian decision. And I think voters are kind of picking up on that. Not that he is Trump or that he's worse than Trump, but that he's not a return to normalcy like was promised.
He
And when that is
doesn't
your
care.
central conceit, when that's your central conceit, that's a problematic thing to have. I don't want to get too partisan or do anything, because I'm genuinely baffled as to why he made that decision, and I want to know more of why, because it's such a political loser and such a human rights loser. It's such a loser on every level. That makes no sense on any level why you would make this decision. And that's the sort of hallmark of the previous administration in a lot of ways, making incomprehensible choices.
It's the hallmark, especially of the positions he advocated in the previous administration. We remember, but Hillary Clinton was the best member of the Obama administration, as hard as that is to believe. And Joe Biden was among the worst. If Obama listened to Biden on everything, bin Laden would still be alive, Iraq would have collapsed a long time ago, and there would be even more fires around the world to deal with.
And for percent, what he's talking about, what Cameron is talking about here, is that Joe Biden actually opposed the decision to take out Osama bin Laden. What is unequivocally considered one of the biggest successes of the Obama administration. Something that spawned illicit celebrations nationwide, illicit and spontaneous celebrations everywhere. He opposed that. That kind of gives you an idea of someone who maybe should be having some more faith in having different foreign policy advisors, or at least being more open to the fact that they're wrong on a lot of things. But I think on some level, something is just, I can't say why he would do that or why his administration would do that, because it doesn't make sense. That's just fundamentally what it is.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Cameron. I want to just keep the conversation moving here. Are we all four of us of the opinion that Republicans are favored to take the House next year?
Yes.
100% nearly. I mean, 99.9%, you know. It's at this point nearly elementary.
Kristy, I'll take that nod as a yes.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a principle. Generally, the opposing party gains in the midterms, and obviously the Democrats have a very narrow margin, and they're not managing these crises in a way that's inspiring confidence in their leadership.
Well, but I mean, even redistricting, even reapportionment alone will probably grant us a majority.
I would put the odds closer to, because I don't want to make a judgment this far out, I would put the odds closer to 60-40 for the House. I think that it's a very, very good shot for Republicans, but obviously things can change.
Yeah.
I thought,
and guys, no way. I thought that, even with I always thought Republicans were favored to take the House. I thought until recently Dems were favored to hold the Senate. Now I no longer think that.
The Senate is trickier.
The Senate is trickier just because of the number of close but still big seats. And the problem for Dems is that they have a lot of close seats that are all going to fall at the exact same time.
Yeah,
and they're all getting really close to falling at the exact same time.
It's the blue wall all over.
Yeah, And Eric, you might like to hear this. We've talked about some DMs. I think unless things improve for the Biden administration, I think Sununu is the tipping point seat. I think he'd win.
I think that'd be reasonable. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
The biggest liability for Republicans is probably Pennsylvania. At this point, that's going to be a really challenging race regardless. But again, the margin that you need for all of those tipping point states to flip is probably something like R+6. Okay. I think that's generally agreeable, right? For if not all of them, to get to 53 to 47.
I don't think they need much of a shift to flip Pennsylvania. Or sorry, no, they'll already hold Pennsylvania. They hold Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin are the two.
Pennsylvania and if it wasn't such a red state, Ohio, we haven't found a solid good candidate yet. Once we do, things will get a lot easier.
Okay, so I don't want to stray too much from Afghanistan. We can all like nerd out about Senate projections in a bit. I just want to ask like how much Afghanistan is going to factor into this. Like, are Republicans going to pursue impeachment if they take the House?
Day one. Yeah. We should have already moved an impeachment motion.
It's the new normal. Permanent impeachment is the new normal. I'm not actually necessarily sure that's a bad thing. But it needs to be over something that's legitimate. But I don't think there's any reason. Yeah. Right. So Republicans want revenge for the first Trump impeachment.
Cameron, I was having a conversation with a progressive friend of mine, and I think I'll throw this to all three of you. And what he basically said is the reason why he thinks that impeachment would be a bad idea is because a a bad foreign policy decision is not an impeachable offense. That's how he put it.
Well, but it's not. This isn't bad. I mean, there's not even a word to describe what the last few months have been like. With just all they've been lying. There's no better way to say it than they are wholly disconnected from reality, as Eric said. The statements and their actions have been so incompetent over the past few months. I mean, I argue with somebody on the left of sort of the foreign policy organization bunch who said the State Department can't possibly be this incompetent. They'll definitely have a plan to get everybody out before the withdrawal. Look what happened. They had no idea. They had no plan. They rushed in troops to try and stem the loss that everybody said was coming. Everybody from the media to Congress, to those in all these organizations, everybody told them this was going to be a disaster. And they lied and lied and lied and said that it was going to be fine and that we're hysterics for wondering, we've returned to normal, to a new competent era.
The adults are in charge.
The adults are in charge. And it's been a disaster of the highest order with, I mean, all of these, it's not, they didn't just stop, this isn't a Katrina, right? Where it's just bad luck, they almost got away with it. No, this is something they set up. They intentionally walked us into this without a plan, without
this is a choice.
Right,
yeah, they chose to fail, and they set up everything to fail. I mean, they spent the last 8 months systematically destroying the Afghan military by withdrawing all support, all aid, all advisors. And then they're like, oh, they'll last for 6 months. Everybody told them that was nonsense. Now, obviously, it still collapsed faster than even the most pessimistic estimates. But I mean, the position of the administration was all of these Afghans should die so that we can take our time with withdrawing.
So
shockingly, they didn't agree.
So who specifically gets impeached? The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the President himself, and what?
Biden.
And
I don't
what
think the chairman can be impeached.
No,
well, just incompetence.
It'll be Biden. Like,
I would go after Blinken too. I would.
The
go
way
after
to think
Blinken
about this
too.
is it's revenge. The previous form of congressional rage against the president was censuring, which is what the Republican House did to Obama officials on multiple occasions. Even after Benghazi, they never threatened to impeach Obama, even though they had the House. They could have forced a vote. The level of incompetence in that range here is they could do something. For example, the drone strike that was mentioned is indefensible.
They lied. They openly lied. That's the dangerous part. They're not just incompetent, but they openly murdered 10 people. They lied that they had all this evidence that obviously was false.
Yeah, an aid worker, multiple children, none of them were terrorists. And they did this with a bomb that was basically made of knives.
No, they did. They lied about that too.
Kristy, so I'm going to bring Kristy in right now.
Do you think they were given false intelligence by the Taliban, or do you think they just decided they wanted to blow something up so that they could claim they were doing
Honestly,
something?
I don't know which is worse. I can totally believe that they took the Taliban's word for who needed to be taken out. I completely believe that. But no, but if you look at the explosion pattern, they just used a normal Hellfire missile. It wasn't the special, CIA ninja one at all. That one would, I mean, that's why they wiped the entire family out. The normal ninja missile is one of the most incredible pieces of technology we have. And they didn't use it. They probably don't even have any near Afghanistan.
Okay,
so what happens? No,
they talked about how this was a great evidence of how they were going to continue to fight terrorism in Afghanistan after we're gone. And
yeah, but think about it.
Aid worker.
Their whole position is based on they're going to over the horizon strikes against terrorists. They're a couple of blocks down the street and they're already murdering a dozen civilians.
Well, I would say the impeachable argument, I would say the impeachable argument would be conspiring with the Taliban. That would be a very serious charge. I do think, I don't know if it's justified. I do think that President Biden has been more friendly with the Taliban as of late.
They almost certainly handed them a ton of money.
Well, I personally think that I would argue the charge most likely would be dereliction of duty, given given that Biden himself has been refusing to, has his record of speaking before the American people on the subject has been shaky at best. And
that's charitable.
And I don't want to verge too much into the political hackery side of things. I'm just genuinely not sure what this administration thinks it is doing, or what their approach is, or what their strategy is, aside from being wrong on everything.
They're very good at it. It's perfect. They have managed to pick a pathway that I didn't even think possible, of taking all of the mistakes of the Obama administration and adding a couple zeros on everything. I mean, they have genuinely gotten everything wrong on not just foreign policy, but on COVID, on inflation, on infrastructure, on other debates on the Hill. They have genuinely gotten everything wrong. It's impressive.
Mm-hmm. You can point to a lot of decisions that were made: the Johnson & Johnson pause, the decision to withdraw or to hold the withdrawal date, the decision to not let in refugees, the decision to not provide any aid, the decision, for example, the Taliban just offered to let us keep Kabul. We could keep Kabul. They said, if you want to do that, then fine. And we said, no. That's a decision. That's an incomprehensible mistake. Leaving Bagram Airfield, that made no sense. That's the last thing we should leave. I mean, you leave that after you've blown everything else, all of our other equipment up. None of this makes sense from a strategy other than trying to get to September 11th without any Americans in Afghanistan.
Does it not amplify everything that at our embassy, the immense defensive systems that we had protecting it, very effective, we blew them up on the end as we couldn't get them out with the personnel? Does that not say everything? That a building that cost, what, $750 million, with being able to tank everything, we had to abandon. We should have flattened the embassy before we left, honestly, just to deny the Taliban a symbol.
Mm-hmm. There is so much of this that is just indefensible on a policy level, which is why generally the administration and its supporters are falling back on we should have left a long time ago, or this is the previous administration's fault. Neither of which makes any sense, given the current administration is the one in charge and the one who decided to do this.
They kind of given up on the we got 120,000 people out of Afghanistan, so
it's a lie.
Yes, they've given up on that argument.
It's a lie. That's why
they've moved on. They've literally they want to get the infrastructure thing done. That's the priority now, is to try and get some sort of win during this whole scenario, and just hope you get a bill passed that's going to somehow make everything better.
I think another thing, and just to go off of that 120,000 figure, the only really heartening thing for me was watching the behavior of our allies during this, the British, the French, the Ukrainians, surprisingly, doing their best to get their people and our people out as much as they possibly could. I mean, imagine a state of affairs where Ukrainian special forces are running through the street looking for their people, and our people are tucked away in the middle of an airbase doing nothing, with orders to do nothing, to not even try to go out. Remember that whole ambassador thing in which, and I still don't think our ambassador hung around, given how long it took for them to issue a statement that he was still there, with the British and French ambassadors dutifully staying at the embassy, getting their people out as best they could.
Yeah, it's worth noting this was a genuine international incident in terms of the international outrage generally given towards President Biden. Again, there's a reason the administration is trying to move on. It's that it's not worked. There's a reason they're not touting getting people out before September 11th, because that was not working. They've looked at their polling, and they probably looked at the actual reality of the situation and realized there's nothing to salvage here. This is a losing issue.
Well, but it's worse than that, because and this is beyond anything Trump ever did in the last 4 years. But
even
the
negotiating
trust
with
of
the Taliban.
No. But in terms of the destruction of the trust we have between us and our allies, it's gone. We have obliterated hundreds of years of friendship with the British, with the French, with all of these people in 2 months? We didn't tell the British we were leaving.
Yeah, we've certainly done for whatever Trump did, he genuinely left the craziest stuff until after he was a lame duck. Biden did what people said Trump would do in 7 months, which is obliterate trust with allies, make the parliament so angry that they condemn him.
Oh, openly on all
Yeah.
sides,
In a
including
vote.
very pro-U.S.
Yeah.
parliamentarians.
And
Yeah,
and,
And
and do you
that
think
was
Biden?
it's a
Oh, sorry. Go
problem.
ahead, Kristy.
Oh, well, that was after the NATO conference, a couple months ago, where Biden said, "Oh, America is back. You can trust us again."
Oh yeah,
Again, the thing I go back to is none of this makes sense. I'm trying to devise any sort of rational reason for this behavior beyond just pure stupidity, because I can't see what the winning issue was supposed to be here. How this was supposed to work.
Specifically for not informing the UK, I think that Biden just has a beef with Boris Johnson
Oh, he
because of
hates
what he's
the
doing in
British.
Northern Ireland.
He hates the British.
Oh,
He's an
oh, yeah,
ardent Irish nationalist. He's been that for decades. He's the Steve King of the Democratic Party.
He's what was the
No,
name
Peter
of
King.
that Republican?
Peter King.
Peter King.
Yeah, Peter King.
Yeah, Peter King, not Steve King.
Yeah, there's too many
Steve
Kings.
King was worse.
Well, yeah, for a different reason, but
Yeah,
I mean, he's an
Yeah.
ardent Irish Republican.
yeah. People forget that during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were a bunch of just politicians just out openly supporting the Irish Republican Army in the United States. You could go to bars in Boston and donate money in a pub to the IRA.
Yeah, there were there were even arms shipped from Boston to them.
Yeah, again, like when you bring in someone whose main policy, whose background is from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's not a surprise he may have some unusual views on some issues that are concerning. And I try to give the benefit of the doubt in terms of trying to figure out, well, maybe there's something they were trying to go for. It's just I don't see how this was supposed to work, even in the most ideal scenario, how this was supposed to work out. And I think the administration now realizes that to some degree, given the level they're trying to just ignore it at this point, which is the sign. If you're ignoring this is the sign you've admitted you've lost the issue. If
Well,
you're
the
just
problem
pretending it
is
didn't happen.
the problem for them is, of course, this will not go away. And the signs. I mean, we had both Taiwan and Japan and others openly talking about how they can more independently develop their defense, because we cannot be relied upon. I think that is quite obvious from both this administration and admittedly the last.
France has been talking about the same thing.
The French are always talking about that. That's not surprising.
Yeah.
I would ignore the statements of the French most of the time. They have.
That being said, Biden did out-surrender the French, which is genuinely impressive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, but the French have way too many. They have way too many problems of their own to deal with.
Like in French military academies 30 years from now, they're going to be teaching this. They're going to be teaching this as an example of how to surrender.
Oh yeah. But I think that another thing that was very heartening is the number of smaller nations like Ukraine, like Kosovo, that stepped up and said, "We will do what we can."
Kosovo, one of our staunchest allies. If you look at the countries that love us, Kosovo is always at the top of the list in terms of countries that love America.
I mean, they exist purely by us, so that does help.
Yeah, no, like if you look at Poland consistently, like they're a very secular majority Muslim country that just loves America. They love America and they love Americans. And the fact that they're concerned by this is just like,
isn't that true with most of the Balkans though?
Well, I mean, there's the people who like Russia, and then there's the people who like us.
Yeah. I wouldn't consider I mean, I'm not an expert on the Balkans, but in terms of the areas there, Kosovo and Albania are like the two that love America.
Right.
And they're both ethnically Albanian. That's the reason why ethnic Albanians in areas that have large ethnic Albanian populations tend to really, really like the United States, because we're the country that stuck up for them.
Yeah, and in fact,
Kristy, go ahead.
Oh, Albania has also been stepping up to host Afghan refugees. So yeah, I think it is encouraging to see how like you said, how many countries have come together to try to help with this. But the thing is, it was a completely unforced error, despite what our government is trying to convince us of.
They forced themselves to commit an error.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was no reason not to just tell the Taliban months ago that, well, first of all, it was not a binding treaty. It was a agreement with a terrorist organization. They could have completely backed out of it, or they could have just told the Taliban, when you start following the peace agreement, so will we. If you want U.S. soldiers gone, stop blowing people up. And then, I mean, they absolutely did not have to say, oh, well, we had this agreement with the Taliban. It would be like agreeing to sell you a car for $5,000, and you don't pay the money, but you say, well, I still get the car because that was the agreement. And
Well,
that's
but
like what we're
Yeah.
telling
it is, and it is kind of frightening to watch a lot of former members of the Trump administration criticize this administration when they did have a lot to do with the undermining of the Afghan government and this shameful deal with the Taliban. You know, a lot of these people, and this goes back quite a ways, you know, a ton of members of the Taliban's new government, quote unquote, came from Gitmo or from Afghan prisons, released by Obama or Trump. They should have been executed years ago. And yet,
in response to, I want to respond to Kristy because I think this is
go ahead, Eric. I was going to say,
which is a real, it was a really good, sorry.
I was just going to ask Cameron if those people should have been brought to trial and executed.
Trial? That's not a word I particularly understand. No, we'll let Eric talk, because
yeah. But Kristy pointed out this is an unforced error, and I think that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I want to present an idea here, which is that if in the world of video games, there's a quote that is very common, which is attributed to Shigeru Miyamoto. It's that a delayed video game is eventually good, but a rushed one is always bad. I'm going to apply this to foreign policy. You could delay this decision indefinitely, and it could eventually be a good one. They didn't have to make this decision. No, they chose to do it, and they got a bad result as a consequence. Like, they chose to do this. This is the path they deliberately chose. They knew this was not going to work. They made the decision to do this. They own all of this. This is on them. If they knew the warning signs were there, you can't point to the previous administration and say, well, they did this first. No, the buck stops with you. You came in here and said the adults are back in charge. Are they?
They've done this before. I mean, this is the sort of, they did this exact same thing in Iraq. They basically did it in Libya. They never really got in, but they basically did the same thing in Syria. This group of people have been doing this for years now. Even going back to the Clinton administration, they were doing this all over.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it makes it.
No, please.
It makes no sense unless you assume the Democratic Party's position on foreign policy for the last 3 decades or 5 decades really has just genuinely been broken, and that they don't understand foreign policy, which I think is the case. They don't. There have been a couple of political decisions that have worked from Democrats in between, but I think they generally misunderstand the trustworthiness of our allies and their willingness to work with us, and the untrustworthiness of our enemies, and how making concessions without justification or without a reasonable prize in return is a bad idea. There's a reason we went through so many administrations and didn't get anything out of the Israel peace process. And then we get to the Trump administration, one of the genuinely good things they did was the Abraham Accords, because they approached foreign policy, at least from a perspective of kind of a realist perspective in terms of making decisions based on where the pieces are on the table. I think Democrats have an ideal position of where these pieces are, that we can reason with Iran, we can reason with this country, we can reason with this one, and that it's our allies and us that have been wrong. That's not how it actually works in reality.
But that's how they think. They are usually openly against our allies. They're against Israel. They don't like Europe, just as a general principle. They generally despise most of our allies in the Mideast, thinking them, brutal murderers or whatever, which is probably true, but not in comparison to our actual enemies.
It's a pick. Aside from Israel and maybe Jordan, it's a choose your own adventure of murderers in the Middle East.
I think the problem is that the people who are in charge of these decisions are idealists. Like, the reason why they would go against their allies and try to say that they can reason is because they truly think that they can make an impasse and to solve these issues, when in reality they probably can't.
Yeah, they're not realist. Again, I don't want to credit the Trump administration some brilliant foreign policy, but what they did do was, from a realist perspective, looked at what was going on and said, we think we can get Israel and a couple of these other countries, smaller countries in the Middle East that are our allies, to the table in agreement for stuff, an agreement for concessions on both sides. And what do you know? It worked. They were already kind of working together in a lot of ways. Formalizing it is just great for everyone. It's great for the economy. It's great for foreign policy. It's great for the goals of generally, which is the new axis, which is you pick a side at Saudi Arabia or it's Iran. What it's shifted to now is that Israel is a focal part of that anti-Iran coalition. That's a very good thing.
Part of me is hoping Oman and Qatar are next.
Yeah. Oman, I can see Oman.
Oman has a very large pro-Iran Shia-ish population.
Well, so does Bahrain.
Well, Bahrain, they're willing to execute their own people for
Yes.
supporting Iran. Oman, they're not. I mean, you'll remember in, I think it was 2012, the Saudis invaded Bahrain to deal with pro-Iran protesters. So
and keep in mind that Qatar is the black sheep of the Middle East in a lot of ways.
They need to be dealt with, honestly.
It's
a severe problem.
They're so loathed by the rest of the Middle East, and particularly Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia for a time was seriously considering turning Qatar into an island and making the canal that would separate the Saudi Arabia and Qatar filled with nuclear waste. I'm not making that up. That was a plan they were considering doing. It would have been.
And then just to shift, and then obviously we have the other interesting bunch of murders with the Turks, who have spent the past year being very successful in their foreign policy endeavors with their victories in Syria, in Libya, in Azerbaijan. And so you sort of have this very weird sort of bunch. And I think a lot of Dems are unwilling to jump into that mix. They're afraid of interacting with sketchy people.
It was also
go ahead, Kristy.
Yeah.
Well, it was also an issue with the Trump administration, and I had honestly had some hope that the Biden administration was going to be tougher on Russia and Turkey than the Trump administration, who seemed to, because it may have just really been Trump's personal relationships with some of those countries, but I mean, I was very disappointed in basically Erdogan just called in favors and Trump's like, all right, we're getting out of Syria. And then, I mean, I think some advisors kind of talked him into sending some people back there to guard the oil fields, which was really to try to like stabilize the situation a little bit. But I mean, President Trump really kind of made a mess there and then scrambling to try to mitigate it a little bit. And now I have zero confidence that the Biden administration is going to do anything different. Although President Biden seems to think we don't have troops in Syria, so I don't know if he's intentionally lying or if he's uninformed and doesn't realize that they're still there.
You're very kind, in fact, because I would say that it's a mental problem. But I think
I think what they need to do to encourage him to remember these foreign policy decisions is to hold these events where he's being informed of these over an ice cream break. I think he could really benefit. I think he could really benefit from maybe listening harder if he has some ice cream. I think that could be an idea to approach.
The problem with the Trump administration is that their public statements generally didn't match their actions. Their public statements were very pro-Russia, and pro, our usual enemies, but their actions were generally quite harmful to them. Going after Nord Stream, helping Ukraine,
the punishing
Nord Stream
decision makes no sense. Yeah,
especially when they went after Keystone XL.
Punishing the Russians in Libya. But whereas this administration is supposedly, this new anti-Russia force, and yet they've done absolutely everything they can to improve Russia's position in the world, with Nord Stream, in Syria, in Ukraine, with Turkey. I mean, they've done all of these things to help the Turks.
Yeah,
the Russians. I mean,
I absolutely agree. What matters is really actions. But it is ironic that after the Democrats spent so many years complaining about Russia and talking about how Russia put Trump in there and all this stuff, and then they go in there and they're like even softer on Russia.
And they've
always been soft.
They're immediately like, Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the $1 billion handout to Vladimir Putin and every other future Russian dictator. That's a great idea. Let's go forward with that, even though Congress said you can't.
Well, it's even more dangerous because it removes a piece of leverage that Poland and Ukraine currently have.
Yeah, and does it betray Biden's supposed environmental credentials? I personally think, from an environmental perspective, pipelines are a hell of a lot better than transporting oil by train.
It's natural gas in this case, but
or truck.
Yeah, but does Biden's virtue signaling on environmentalism become undone with the Nord Stream decision?
No. What I think the problem for him really is like I think it was Cameron who said this earlier, which is that his administration is filled with idealists who think that they can just be the magical ones who will change everything, and if they just talk to people, they'll understand. And that's not how foreign policy works.
Well, I think
It's also not how the end forever wars crowd, they seem to think that you just leave everywhere and then all of a sudden everything will be fixed. That's not how it works either.
I think that was
Foreign
me who
policy
made
is
that
really,
point.
really messy. It's really messy.
well, it's messy, and there's a lot of gray, and they're very unwilling to see
Mhm.
gray. They think that when we go into a place, we are the bad party. You know, with their hyping up of every little incident, you know, versus all of these actual problems. But with regards to Nord Stream, I will note something, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Jonathan. The Greens winning in Germany will be very good for us, because they are the anti-Russian party these days in Germany.
That's unusual
Mhm.
for Greens.
The CDU was very close to having a pro-American leader, but they stupidly in their leadership election put in place the guy who's driven their party to ruin.
Yeah,
mean,
actual ruin.
We were
Wasn't it
this
very-
close to having an Atlanticist as the chancellor of Germany, and it was ripped away from
Or
us.
Soder?
It's really sad. I'm trying to remember his name, but there were two leadership candidates for the CDU, one of which was pro-American, and the
Yeah,
other was the one
Soder
who
would have
won.
been it. But
Yeah.
it's a situation in which, you know, and this is not uncommon in a lot of other places where the right is not the pro-American faction in the country. And in Germany, that is, well, going back a long time, that was not the case. But the Greens are genuinely the pro-NATO, anti-Russia party, mostly because they have to distinguish themselves from the left, who have,
Mhm.
you know, for obvious reasons, are pro-Russia.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
same thing with Moldova as well.
Well, that's the irony of some of these newer Green parties
Well-
that popped up, is that there is the irony of some of them, not all of them, but some of them, is that they're actually supplanting the center left because they're actually just not nuts, and they're being a little bit more reasonable in terms, like, they're not watermelons. Some of them are watermelons, which a watermelon is a
I mean, most of them. I like that. That's
Yeah.
a good phrase.
yeah, well, watermelon is green on the outside, red on the inside. That's basically what the implication being you're a green, but really you're a socialist. Some of them are not, and generally speaking, a socialist foreign policy would be expected to not be in favor of the United States. So it is interesting that some of these Green parties are very Atlanticist, very pro-NATO, very much in our interest compared to others.
Yeah.
Okay, I do
There-
realize it's. Oh, so go ahead. I was gonna say I realize some of us have to go soon. So Cameron, you want to take this
Mhm.
last point?
Well, I was just gonna say that the Greens in Germany are probably the only ones. I'm trying to think of another example. You mentioned Moldova, but of course, it's the party of communists that is the
Mhm.
pro-Russia party there.
I was thinking more in some of the provincial parties in Canada is another good
Oh.
example. The federal party is a lost cause. Some of the provincial ones are quite
Like in
moderate. compared
Prince
to-
Edward Island.
Yeah.
for example.
British Columbia,
yeah.
they're extreme though. British Columbia,
Oh,
they
yeah.
yeah.
I think some of them are like being called Tories on bicycles is the derogative term that's being given to some of these Greens.
Well,
In
the funny thing
Canada,
is that in British Columbia, it's actually the British Columbia Liberals who are the right-wing party.
Yeah.
Yes, they're a coalition of, not a coalition, but they're everyone who's not a New Democratic Party member or Green is voting for the Liberals.
Right. So
I
sort
do
of like
believe
how
the
in
Conservatives
Australia,
are
the
rising.
right-wing party is the Liberals.
Really.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna just we're gonna go around once and we'll say which charge, if we believe that is warranted, is the Biden administration is gonna face. Like which impeachment article are they gonna face? I say dereliction of duty. Eric?
That would be a reasonable charge. You could also have a collusion with foreign power. That could also be one. Collusion
Kristy.
with an enemy, I should say.
Yeah, Kristy.
Yeah, I would say the same as Eric. Yeah, I think that they could. I think if they did really pay off the Taliban, which it seems like they must have, that even just aid and abetting America's enemies. I mean, if they're paying off a bunch of money to the Taliban to get them to cooperate with evacuation.
Cameron.
I would be more interested in investigating what they told Congress in the months leading up to this, because you could easily get a misleading charge out of that.
Okay. Some of us have to go now, so I am going to wrap this up. Kristy, Eric, Cameron, thank you so much for coming on this show. Kristy, we will have you back next week. Eric, Cameron, we'll have you back whenever.
All right.